When we talk about social media, it's been a complete game changer, because I think we are bombarded continually because of social media with information, because of international news that we have. We could really saturate ourselves, with the war. And I think the question really is it going to help the people of Israel? Is it going to help ourselves? Is it going to help anyone by sitting and watching?
Chatting to David Abrahamsohn, psychologist in private practice, talking about the challenges that people are facing at the moment. I would imagine that you're one of the first lines, or the first people that start to see some of the difficulties that both children and adults are experiencing. Are you seeing an increase in mental health and challenges?
Well, there's no question that over the last couple of years we've seen an increase in anxiety and depression. We've lived through COVID, but we've definitely seen since the outbreak of the war that there's been, and it's obviously anecdotal, but speaking to colleagues in the community, speaking to colleagues in general, there's definitely been a significant increase in anxiety, depression, and unfortunately we're seeing a lot more suicide as well.
Right. So does it stand alone, or has this built on COVID and financial concerns and South Africa Inc. And then the war, or is the war something in of itself?
I think it's been difficult out there over the last couple of years in so many respects. People are struggling. We live such a fast-paced life. Financially, things are difficult for a lot of people. But I think for the first time in a generation, many people are experiencing, in fact, most people are experiencing anti-Semitism firsthand. Before, people would go and visit a Holocaust memorial site or a museum, and it would all be very theoretical for our generation.
We'd have to imagine it.
Absolutely, and I think for me, for the first time ever, people are living anti-Semitism, and because it's so real and so in your face, and especially in South Africa, I think our community, with our government being so vocal internationally, it's really made people feel very insecure, and has definitely played a role.
So what are you seeing?
So we're seeing a definite uptick.
I suppose you won't list names. No. Okay. No.
No, you might have to hurt me first. But anxiety is definitely up, and not only with teens and children, but with adults as well. We're seeing, as I said, levels of depression going up, and I think the anxiety and the depression often are comorbid. They live together, and as I say, unfortunately, for many people, it has been the tipping point where it's just that they just feel completely overwhelmed now. They feel overwhelmed by the whole situation. And as I say, it could have been cumulative, maybe not on its own, but we definitely are seeing in our community a high degree of suicide, which is very, very worrying.
I would imagine a challenge for parents is how much to talk about what's going on in Israel. You can't exactly hide it because parents are feeling anxious. Everybody's watching the news. Everybody's talking about it. We've all become these news addicts in a way. We can't pretend that away. But at the same time, we still want to protect our kids, especially people with young kids, from this. I mean, do we talk about hostages? What age is appropriate to talk about hostages to your children?
Well, I think it's important to keep two things in mind. I think developmentally, what age is your child? Is your child a preteen, a teen, maybe in junior school? And take that into account, because I think for me, for example, like when you're a younger child in nursery school, in the younger grades 1 and 2, there's this whole idea of proximity. Kids don't often understand that Israel's quite far away, and they misinterpret that there's a war in another country and start to actually feel that they are under threat directly.
Right.
And I think often people don't understand that. But so I think for me really it's about understanding your child's developmental age, but then also understanding your child. So you can get younger children who are very inquisitive, who keep their ears open, around the Shabbos table. And I think for me it's really about giving age appropriate information, but then hearing what they know. So I think it's important. We often forget to say, what do you know about the war? What do you know? Tell me about Israel. What do you, and take it from there. And then ask, do you have any questions? What are you hearing from your friends? And I think that's a really good base to use as an entry point into kind of understanding what your child needs and wants to hear.
As somebody who is very involved in the news around this, reporting on it, discussing, chatting to people all week, I sometimes feel when I get to a Friday night table that I actually don't want to talk about this anymore. I'd rather talk about something completely different. Is it healthy to not give expression to that all the time, or are we, or do we do ourselves an injustice?
You know, it's so interesting because I think we all want to feel like we are in control of situations when we feel overwhelmed. And I think about social media, it's been a complete game changer because I think we are bombarded continually because of social media with information, because of international news that we have. We could really saturate ourselves, with the war. And I think the question really is it going to help the people of Israel? Is it going to help ourselves? Is it going to help anyone by sitting and watching? I think there is this kind of feeling, that you want to be in control. You don't want to miss any news.
So the more we know, the more in control we are.
Absolutely. But really what happens is we start to feel completely overwhelmed, and I think that can cause psychological damage. So I don't think it's important. I think it's imperative that we are so aware of how much we are actually consuming, because it is like consumption for our brains, of social media. And then, so the amount, but also what we're consuming and where we're consuming it from. Because I always like to use the analogy of takeaway, or foods generally. You want to make sure that you are aware of what you're eating. Sometimes it's okay to have some takeaways. It's exactly the same thing around what we consume from social media. So I think really it's about being more aware of what we're watching, where we are watching it from, what information we're getting, and obviously the amount. And I think, as I say, it's imperative, and I use that word, very purposefully, that we do not spend hours and hours and hours just absorbing all this trauma, because in the end, it is very traumatic to watch what's happening in Israel.
You mentioned a short while ago about there being some real concerns. Unfortunately, a number of suicides in the community. What are the warning signs? Not to say that somebody's at that point, but the warning signs to look out for in ourselves, in our family members, in our friends, community members, where we might want to seek help, professional help, because it's a little unmanageable.
That's a great question, and I think often we look to our bodies, because we often aren't good at expressing ourselves. Some of us are, but some aren't. And I think, when we start to, or we notice in other people, things like a changing eating patterns. And we're not just talking about 1 day or 2 days, we're talking about over a 7 to 10 day period. Eating patterns, sleeping patterns are disrupted. You're sleeping more or less. Your energy levels have gone down. You're not really interested. You're not feeling in the things that you normally feel really passionate about. I think just irritability, a lot more irritability, a lot more.
And if we're generally irritable, is that a concern?
Yeah, that is a concern. Right. Then you should see a psychologist anyway.
Okay.
But
just asking for a friend.
100%. No, absolutely. So it's
a change from the baseline.
Yes.
Whatever your baseline is, if there's a change, whether it's about eating, about interest, it's about energy level, it's about irritability, or mood, all of these things.
Exactly.
If there's a baseline change for a period, that's when it is a good idea.
And often isolation. I think whether we are extroverts or introverts, I think isolation is something that we tend to do, and that's so important, because I think when many people feel isolated during this time, and that's often the first thing that happens when we do feel down or overwhelmed. We tend to isolate ourselves, and that's very difficult and that puts us in a really difficult position, because we know as psychologists that interacting, sharing your thoughts is so powerful, and it's a very difficult sell these days, because we all think about material things, what is going to help, a pill, something self-help, and something you can touch or take, so it's very physical. And we know how powerful it is to share one's thoughts, to not feel alone, so actually just speak out, and how cathartic that is. But then also not being alone physically. And then we saw that during COVID. We learned very, very, very important lessons around physically being around other people. So I think, during this time, we talk about such a difficult time. I think one of the most important things to say is we're blessed with an amazing community in South Africa. I've had the privilege of just being in another community, which I won't mention overseas, and we are so blessed to have organizations like the Chev, who do offer free counseling, like Hatsola, who do have a teen line that you can use for free. We have Chai FM, who have got a helpline. So really, there are so many places to turn for help, but not only for help, but just not be alone, to be part of a community, whether it's being part of a community group, going to shul, going to talks, whatever it might be. But I think it's important not to be alone at this time, to share and be together. And I think, of course, simchas. I was at a simcha at a wedding recently, and that it's unbelievable. And I didn't realize how it would be, and to be there amongst other members of the community.
Part of a community,
absolutely.
Part of celebration.
And no one spoke about the war. It was really
That's
just
incredible.
about being together.
And that's the message.
That is the message.
Absolutely fantastic. David Abrahamsohn, thank you for your wisdom. I'm Howard Feldman, smiling in the dark.